My daughter told me I was too embarrassing to walk her down the aisle, that my clothes were too cheap and my hair too gray for her perfect wedding photos. She said I'd ruin everything just by being there. So I didn't go to her wedding. Instead, I showed up at her reception with foreclosure papers for the house I'd been secretly paying for, and suddenly I wasn't embarrassing anymore, I was terrifying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lorraine Simpson, but everyone calls me Lori. I'm 54 years old, and apparently according to my own daughter, that makes me an embarrassment to her perfect life. I work 2 jobs, morning shift at Henderson's Diner downtown and evening inventory at the medical supply warehouse on Maple Street. My hands are calloused, my back aches most days, and my hair went silver faster than I wanted it to. But I thought that was just life, just the price of raising 3 kids on my own after their father decided his secretary was more interesting than his family. I never thought it made me shameful. The conversation happened on a Tuesday. I remember. Because Tuesdays are my short days, I only work the diner shift, so I was home by 3, still wearing my uniform with the little coffee stain on the pocket that never quite washed out. I was folding laundry in the living room when Jessica called. Not texted, called, which should have been my first warning. Jessica only calls when she needs something or when she's about to deliver bad news like it's a gift wrapped in pretty paper. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding," she said without even saying hello. Her voice had that careful tone she uses when she's trying to manage me, the same one she's used since high school when she'd explain why she needed money for this or that emergency that somehow always involved her looking better than everyone else. I set down the towel I was folding and walked to the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. "What about it, honey? Is everything okay with the venue? The flowers?" I'd been asking about wedding details for months, trying to be involved, trying to be the mother who cared about centerpieces and invitation fonts even though I'd never had a real wedding myself. "No, everything's fine with that. It's just..." She paused, and I could hear her breathing, could practically see her pacing around that pristine apartment I'd never been invited to visit. "Brad and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you didn't walk me down the aisle." I stopped moving entirely. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had shifted inward. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we think it would be better if Uncle Richard walked me down instead. He's got that distinguished look, you know? And his suit is really nice, and he knows how to carry himself at these kinds of events." Uncle Richard. My ex-husband's brother, who I'd seen maybe 5 times since the divorce 12 years ago. Uncle Richard, who worked in finance and drove a BMW and had never once asked how Jessica was doing in school or if she needed anything. Uncle Richard, who would look perfect in wedding photos because he'd never spent a day of his life worrying about whether there was enough money for groceries. "Jessica, I'm your mother. I've been planning to walk you down that aisle since you were little. We talked about it when you got engaged." My voice came out smaller than I intended, like I was asking for permission instead of stating a fact. "I know, Mom, but think about it practically. You're going to be in that dress from JCPenney, and your hair is just... It's very gray, Mom. And I know you can't afford to get it done professionally, and Brad's family is going to be there, and his parents are flying in from Connecticut, and they're used to a certain kind of presentation." Each word hit like a physical blow. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the one with the wobbly leg that I kept meaning to fix but never had time for. "A certain kind of presentation. Don't make this about class, Mom. It's not about that. It's about wanting everything to be perfect for my wedding day. This is the most important day of my life, and I just want it to be beautiful and elegant and not embarrassing," I finished for her. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." There was silence on the line, the kind that's louder than shouting. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the hum of the refrigerator, could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down. I could hear everything except my daughter taking back the words that had just rearranged my entire understanding of how she saw me. "Mom, you're being dramatic. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to have a nice wedding. And I would ruin that just by being there." I didn't say ruin. I said, "Look, can we just talk about this like adults? I'm trying to be considerate of everyone's feelings here." I stood up, walked to the window above the sink, and looked out at the small backyard where I'd pushed Jessica on the swing set I'd bought secondhand and painted bright red because it was her favorite color. Where I'd taught her to ride a bike. Running alongside her until my lungs burned because I was working double shifts even then and never had time to exercise. Where I'd sat with her on summer evenings, braiding her hair and listening to her talk about her dreams. "Whose feelings, exactly?" I asked. "Everyone's. Brad's family is very traditional, and they have certain expectations, and I'm already nervous about everything being perfect, and I just thought maybe it would be easier if Uncle Richard handled the walking part, and you could just be there. In the audience. Being supportive. Being supportive from the cheap seats. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I turned away from the window and looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd packed Jessica's lunches every day for 12 years, where I'd helped her with homework at the table that was too small but was all I could afford, where I'd sat with her when she cried over boys and friend drama and college applications. The same kitchen where I'd counted and recounted money, figuring out how to pay for her class trips and her prom dress and her college application fees. How much is this wedding costing? I asked suddenly. What? Why does that matter? Just tell me. How much? I don't see how that's relevant to Jessica. How much? She sighed, that long-suffering sound she makes when she thinks I'm being unreasonable. $35,000. But Brad's parents are paying for most of it, and we're handling the rest, so you don't need to worry about $35,000. I said it slowly, tasting each word. For one day. It's not just one day, Mom. It's the most important day of my life. It's the day I'm going to remember forever, the day I'm going to show my children someday. I want it to be perfect. And I would make it imperfect. You're twisting my words. Am I? Because it sounds like you're saying that your own mother, the woman who raised you, the woman who worked 2 jobs to put you through college so you could meet Brad and plan this perfect wedding, is too embarrassing to be seen with you in front of his family. Mom, that's not. It sounds like you're saying that everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, everything I've given up so you could have a better life than I did, doesn't matter as much as making sure Brad's parents don't think less of you for having a mother who looks like she actually works for a living. Stop it. Just stop. You're making this about you when it's about me and my wedding day. You're right, I said, and my voice was steady now, calm in a way that surprised me. It is about you. And your wedding day. And the fact that you're ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed of you. Then why can't I walk you down the aisle? Silence again. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could hear what sounded like traffic in the background, could hear the life she was living that was so different from mine that I'd become a liability to it. Because, she said finally, and her voice was small, because I want everything to be perfect, and perfect doesn't look like us. There it was. The truth, naked and sharp and final. Perfect doesn't look like us. Perfect doesn't look like a mother who smells like coffee and industrial disinfectant, who has silver hair and laugh lines and hands that show the work they've done. Perfect doesn't look like the woman who raised her. Okay, I said. Okay? Okay. I understand. You do? She sounded surprised, like she'd been bracing for a fight. I do. You want perfect. I get it. So you're not mad? I looked around. My kitchen one more time, at the mismatched dishes in the sink, at the coupons stuck to the refrigerator with magnets from places I'd never been, at the calendar with my work schedules written in different colored pens. I looked at the life I'd built from nothing, the life that had been enough to raise 3 children but wasn't enough to be seen with one of them on her wedding day. I'm not mad, I said, and it was true. I wasn't mad. I was something else entirely. Something colder and clearer and more dangerous than anger. Good. I'm glad we could work this out like adults. Me too. When is the wedding again? October 15th. At the Grandview Country Club. I'll make sure you have all the details. The Grandview Country Club, I repeated. That's expensive. Like I said, Brad's parents are helping with most of it. Most of it. Yeah. Look, Mom, I need to go. Brad's picking me up for dinner, and I still need to get ready. Of course. Have fun. Thanks. And Mom? Thanks for understanding. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. She hung up before I could respond, which was probably for the best because I'm not sure what I would have said. I set the phone down on the counter and stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the silence and feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates rearranging themselves before an earthquake. I wasn't mad. I was worse than mad. I was awake. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jessica's voice when she said, "Perfect doesn't look like us," and the way she'd sounded relieved when I agreed to step aside. I kept thinking about Uncle Richard, who would look distinguished and appropriate walking my daughter down the aisle while I sat in the audience like any other guest, like someone who had just happened to care about the bride rather than someone who had built her entire life around making sure that bride had everything she needed. I got up around midnight and made tea, not because I wanted it but because I needed something to do with my hands. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the wedding, about $35,000, about the Grandview Country Club and Brad's parents from Connecticut and the kind of perfection that didn't include me. And then I thought about something else. Something that Jessica didn't know, something that Brad definitely didn't know, something that even Uncle Richard didn't know because it wasn't the kind of thing I talked about. I thought about the house. Not my house, this little rental with the wobbly chair and the stained countertops and the secondhand furniture that Jessica found so embarrassing. The other house. The one in Willowbrook Estates, the one with the white columns and the circular driveway and the perfectly manicured lawn. The one that Jessica and Brad had been living in for the past 8 months, the one they told everyone they were buying, the one that Brad's LinkedIn profile listed as his address. The house that I owned. I'd bought it 18 months ago, back when Jessica first got engaged and started talking about wanting to live somewhere nice, somewhere that would impress Brad's family, somewhere that would make her feel like she was moving up in the world. She'd been so excited when she found it, so thrilled by the neighborhood and the marble countertops and the master bathroom with the jacuzzi tub. She'd brought Brad to see it, and he'd been impressed by the address, by the prestige of living in Willowbrook Estates. The only problem was that they couldn't afford it. Not even close. Brad made decent money at his marketing job, but not house in Willowbrook money. Jessica's salary at the boutique was barely enough to cover her car payment and her shopping habits. Together, they could maybe afford a small apartment or a starter home in a less desirable neighborhood. But Jessica wanted that house. She wanted it so badly that when she called me crying about how they'd been outbid on 3 other properties, how she was never going to find anything good enough, how Brad's parents were starting to make comments about their living situation, I did what I always did when my children needed something. I found a way to make it happen. I didn't tell her I was buying it. I couldn't afford to buy it outright, but I could afford to put together a down payment by liquidating my small retirement account and taking out a loan against my life insurance policy. I could afford the monthly payments if I picked up extra shifts at the warehouse and skipped lunches and gave up the small luxuries I'd been starting to allow myself now that all 3 kids were grown. I set it up through a property management company, told them I was buying it as an investment property and wanted to rent it to a specific tenant. I had them draw up a lease agreement that made the monthly payments look like rent instead of mortgage payments. I told Jessica that I'd talked to someone who knew the owner, and they were willing to let her and Brad rent the house for below market value because they liked young couples. She believed it because she wanted to believe it. She believed it because it fit the story she wanted to tell about her life, about how things just worked out for her, about how she deserved nice things and they found their way to her. For 8 months, I'd been paying the mortgage on Jessica's perfect house while she told people she was renting it, while Brad posted photos of their place on social media, while they hosted dinner parties and talked about their future together in their beautiful home. For 8 months, I'd been working extra shifts and eating ramen noodles and postponing my own car repairs so they could live in a house that impressed his parents. And now she was telling me I was too embarrassing to walk her down the aisle. I finished my tea and went to the small desk in my bedroom, the one where I kept my important papers. I pulled out the file labeled Willowbrook House and looked through the documents. The mortgage papers with my name on them. The insurance policy with my name on it. The property tax bills that came to my address because I was the owner. I owned the house where my daughter lived. I owned the address that gave her status, the location that impressed Brad's family, the perfect backdrop for the perfect life she was building. I owned the thing that made her feel like she was too good for her own mother. And she had no idea. I sat there in my bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of my secret sacrifice, and I felt something crystallize inside me. Not anger, not hurt, but clarity. Perfect clarity about what I was going to do. Jessica wanted perfect. She wanted a wedding that looked like something from a magazine, a life that impressed people from Connecticut, a family that didn't embarrass her in front of her new in-laws. She wanted all of that more than she wanted me. Fine. She could have it. But she was going to pay for it. I spent the next hour going through the lease agreement, the mortgage documents, the payment records. I looked up the property management company's policies, the state laws about rental agreements, the procedures for lease termination. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I researched the Grandview Country Club, found out what it cost to rent their ballroom, what their cancellation policies were. I made a list of everything I'd paid for in the last 8 months. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance fees. The repairs when their garbage disposal broke and they called the property management company. The professional lawn service that kept their yard looking perfect. The security system that made them feel safe in their expensive neighborhood. I added it all up. $32,000. $32,000 that I'd paid while working 2 jobs and living in a rental house with a wobbly chair and a coffee-stained uniform. $32,000. Just $3,000 short of what their perfect wedding was costing. I looked at the calendar on my desk. October 15th was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to arrange everything. 6 weeks to make sure that when Jessica had her perfect wedding day, she got exactly what she deserved. I closed the file and put it back in the desk drawer. I turned off the light and got into bed, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep. Easily. I had work to do. The next morning, I called in sick to the diner. I never call in sick. In 5 years of working at Henderson's, I'd missed maybe 3 shifts, and that was when I had food poisoning so bad I couldn't stand up. But I called in sick because I had appointments to make, papers to file, and a plan to execute. My first stop was the law office of Patricia Henley, the attorney I'd used when I bought the house. She was a small, sharp woman with silver hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. I'd liked her immediately because she reminded me of my mother, who had died when Jessica was in high school. My mother had been tough, practical, and utterly without patience for nonsense. "Lori," Patricia said when I walked into her office. "I wasn't expecting to see you. Is everything all right with the property?" "That depends on how you define all right," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I need to know about lease termination procedures." She raised an eyebrow. "Are your tenants causing problems?" "You could say that." I explained the situation, leaving out the personal details and focusing on the legal facts. I had tenants who were violating the terms of their lease. I had documentation of their violations. I wanted to terminate the lease and reclaim my property. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Lori, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to do this? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. And it sounds like this is going to cause some significant personal complications for you." "I'm sure. Even if it means," Patricia, my daughter told me I was too embarrassing to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. She said I would ruin her perfect day just by being there. She's been living in a house I own, a house I've been paying for while working 2 jobs, and she has no idea. She thinks she's better than me, thinks she deserves better than me. So yes, I'm sure. I want to terminate the lease. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's do this properly. I'll need to review the lease agreement. And the property management company's records. How quickly do you want to move?" "The wedding is October 15th. I want them out before then." "That's aggressive, but doable if we can document lease violations." "What kind of violations are we talking about?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken over the past few months. Photos I'd snapped during the few times I'd been invited to the house, casual pictures that I'd thought were just memories but now served a different purpose. "Unauthorized pets," I said, showing her a photo of the small dog Brad had gotten for Jessica's birthday. "The lease specifically prohibits pets. Unauthorized modifications to the property." I showed her a photo of the built-in bar Brad had installed in the basement. "Subletting without permission." I showed her a photo from Jessica's Instagram, a group shot from a party where she'd tagged someone as staying with us for a few weeks. Patricia looked through the photos, making notes. "This is good. Very good. The unauthorized modifications alone are grounds for immediate termination." "When did you document these?" "Over the past few months. I didn't think about it at the time, but I have dates on all the photos." "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a formal notice of lease termination based on material violations of the lease agreement. We'll give them the minimum required notice period, which in this case is 30 days. That puts us right at mid-October. What if they fight it? They can try, but the evidence is clear. And frankly, most people don't want to go through the hassle and expense of fighting an eviction, especially when they're clearly in the wrong. They'll probably just move out. And if they don't?" Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Then we move to formal eviction proceedings, and that becomes a matter of public record. Most people don't want that on their credit report, especially young professionals who care about their image." I signed the papers and wrote Patricia a check for the retainer. As I was leaving, she called after me. "Lori? I don't know the whole story here, but I want you to know that you're doing the right thing. No one should have to pay for someone else's life while being told they're not good enough to be part of it." I nodded and walked out into the bright September morning. One down, several to go. My next stop was the Grandview Country Club. I'd never been there before, but I'd looked it up online and knew it was the kind of place that took itself very seriously. The kind of place where Brad's parents would feel comfortable, where Jessica would feel like she belonged. The building was exactly what I'd expected. White columns, circular driveway, perfectly manicured grounds. The kind of place that costs money just to look at it. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW and walked up to the front entrance like I belonged there. The woman at the front desk was probably Jessica's age, with blonde hair and a smile that was professionally warm and personally cold. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I'm here about the Simpson-Bradford wedding on October 15th, I said. I need to speak with the events coordinator. Of course. Let me get Melissa for you. Melissa turned out to be a woman in her 40s with the kind of aggressive efficiency that comes from dealing with demanding clients all day. She led me to a small office off the main lobby and offered me coffee, which I accepted even though I didn't want it. Now, what can I do for you regarding the Simpson-Bradford wedding? She asked, settling behind her desk with a tablet and a stack of files. I need to know about the payment schedule and the cancellation policy. She frowned slightly. I'm sorry, but I can only discuss financial details with the parties listed on the contract. I'm Jessica Simpson's mother. And I'm asking because I have reason to believe they may not be able to fulfill their financial obligations. Melissa's professional smile faltered. I see. Well, without going into specifics, I can tell you that we require full payment 2 weeks before the event. If payment is not received by that date, the event is automatically cancelled and the deposit is forfeited. What's the cancellation policy if they cancel voluntarily? It depends on how much notice they give. More than 60 days, they forfeit the deposit but nothing else. Less than 60 days, they're responsible for 50% of the total cost. Less than 30 days, they're responsible for the full amount whether the event happens or not. I did the math quickly. October 15th was exactly 6 weeks away. 42 days. If Jessica and Brad canceled today, they'd owe half the cost of the wedding. If they waited until after the eviction notice, they'd owe the full amount even if the wedding didn't happen. And if they simply don't show up? Then they're responsible for the full amount, and we pursue collection through our legal department. I see. Thank you for your time. I left the country club and sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking. The pieces were starting to fit together. Jessica and Brad were living beyond their means in a house I owned. They were planning a wedding. They couldn't afford with help from Brad's parents. If they suddenly lost their housing and had to find a new place to live, if they had to come up with deposits and moving expenses and first month's rent, they might not have the money for the final wedding payment. And if they couldn't pay for the wedding, they'd owe the full amount anyway. It was elegant, really. They wanted perfect, but perfect was expensive, and they'd been living perfect on my money without knowing it. When that money went away, their perfect life would collapse like a house of cards. I started the car and drove home. I had phone calls to make. The property management company was my next contact. I called them from my kitchen, sitting at the same table where I'd listened to Jessica tell me I was too embarrassing for her wedding. Riverside Property Management, this is Karen. Hi Karen, this is Lori Simpson. I own the property at 1247 Elm Street in Willowbrook Estates. Oh, hi Mrs. Simpson. Is everything okay with the property? Actually, no. I need to discuss lease violations with the current tenants. I see. What kind of violations are we talking about? I went through the list I'd given Patricia. The unauthorized pet, the modifications to the property, the subletting. Karen took notes and asked for the documentation, which I promised to email within the hour. This is pretty serious, she said when I'd finished. The modifications alone are grounds for immediate termination. Do you want us to handle the eviction process? My attorney is handling the legal side, but I want you to coordinate with her. I want this done by the book, no shortcuts, no favors. I want everything documented. Of course. We'll need to schedule an inspection to document the violations. And take photos for the file. When would be convenient? As soon as possible. The tenants don't need to be present, do they? No, we can use our access key. We'll give them the required notice, of course. Perfect. And Karen? When you do the inspection, I want a complete report. Every violation, every modification, every problem. I want it documented. Absolutely. Is there anything else I should know about this situation? I paused, thinking about how to answer that. Just that the tenants are going to be very surprised by this. They may try to claim that the violations are minor or that they had permission. Don't let them manipulate you. Understood. We'll handle it professionally. I hung up and immediately called Patricia to coordinate the inspection with the legal notice. Everything was moving now, all the pieces sliding into place. Jessica and Brad had 6 weeks to enjoy their perfect life in their perfect house before it all came crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more call to make. I dialed Jessica's number and waited for her to answer. When she did, her voice was bright and happy, the voice of someone whose biggest worry was choosing between flowers and centerpieces. Hi Mom. I'm so glad you called. I wanted to talk to you about the reception seating chart. I was thinking you might be more comfortable at a table with some of the other older guests, maybe Aunt Linda and her husband? They're really nice, and I think you'd have a good time. Other older guests. Like I was someone's grandmother who needed to be managed and entertained, not the mother of the bride. That sounds fine, Jessica. I'm sure I'll be comfortable wherever you put me. Great. I'm so glad you're being so understanding about everything. I was worried you might still be upset about the whole walking down the aisle thing. Not at all. I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting everything to be perfect. And you're right. This is your day, and it should be exactly what you want it to be. I'm so glad you see it that way. I was telling Brad how reasonable you were being, and he was really impressed. He said his parents are going to love you. I'm sure they will. Speaking of which, how are the wedding preparations going? Any problems with the vendors or the venue? No, everything's going great. The final payment to the country club is due in a couple of weeks, but Brad's parents are covering that, and the rest of the vendors are all set. The only thing left is the final dress fitting and the flowers. That's wonderful. And you're all set with the house and everything? Oh yeah, we love it there. Brad's been talking about maybe buying it from the owner eventually, once we get more established. It's such a great investment property. I'm sure it is. Well, I just wanted to check in and see how everything was going. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate how supportive you've been about everything. I know this whole situation has been a little complicated, but I'm glad we could work it out like adults. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about Jessica's voice when she talked about the house, about buying it from the owner, about what a great investment it was. She had no idea that she was talking about buying her own house from her own mother. She had no idea that the owner she was planning to negotiate with was the woman she deemed too embarrassing to be seen with in public. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street, opened a bottle of wine, and ate dinner on the good plates instead of paper plates in front of the TV. I took a long bath with expensive bath salts I'd been saving for a special occasion. I was celebrating. Not because I was happy, but because I was finally taking action. For the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting to other people's decisions about my life. I was making my own decisions. And in 6 weeks, everyone was going to find out exactly what those decisions were. The formal notice arrived at Jessica's house on a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after our conversation about the wedding. I know because I was working the morning shift at Henderson's when Karen from the property management company called to confirm delivery. Mrs. Simpson? The notice has been served. The tenants signed for it at 8:47 this morning. I was wiping down the counter at the time, getting ready for the breakfast rush. My hands didn't shake, but I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of solid satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in years. Any immediate response from them? Not yet, but these things usually take a day or two to sink in. They'll probably call us this afternoon with questions. And you know not to discuss any details with them beyond what's in the notice? Absolutely. All inquiries get directed to your attorney. We're just the messenger service at this point. I finished my shift without thinking about it much. There was something peaceful about not knowing exactly when the bomb would go off, about going through the normal motions of taking orders and refilling coffee cups while somewhere across town, my daughter was discovering that her perfect life had fine print she'd never bothered to read. The call came at 2:30, just as I was getting home from the diner. I saw Jessica's name on my phone and let it ring 4 times before answering, not because I was playing games but because I needed those few seconds to make sure my voice would sound normal. Hi honey, how's your day going? Mom. Her voice was tight, higher pitched than usual. Mom, something really weird is happening. What kind of weird? We got this letter today from the property management company. It says we're being evicted. They're saying we violated our lease agreement, but that's impossible. We've been perfect tenants. We pay our rent on time, we take care of the place, we haven't done anything wrong. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked out the window. At the neighbor's garden. Mrs. Chen was pruning her roses, careful and methodical, cutting away the parts that weren't healthy anymore. That does sound strange, I said. What exactly does the letter say? It says we have unauthorized pets, which is ridiculous because Muffin is tiny and doesn't bother anyone. And it says we made unauthorized modifications, but Brad just built a little bar in the basement, and that's an improvement, not damage. And it says something about subletting, but we just let my friend Rachel stay with us for a few weeks when she was between apartments. That's not subletting, that's just being a good friend. I listened to her voice getting more agitated with each justification, and I realized she genuinely didn't understand that rules applied to her. She'd been living her whole life believing that if something made sense to her, if it was convenient or reasonable from her perspective, then it must be acceptable to everyone else. Did you call the property management company? Yes, but they said they couldn't discuss it with me and that I needed to talk to a lawyer if I had questions. A lawyer, Mom. Over a tiny dog and a basement bar. It's insane. What does Brad think? He's freaking out. He's already called his dad, and his dad is looking into lawyers, but this is going to cost us so much money, and we don't have time for this right now. The wedding is in 5 weeks. 5 weeks, Mom. We can't be dealing with housing drama right now. I'm sure it will work out, I said, and my voice was calm because I wasn't lying. It would work out, just not the way she expected. Will you help us? The question hung in the air between us. Such a simple question, the kind I'd been answering yes to for 30 years without thinking about it. Will you help us pay for school? Yes. Will you help us with the down payment? Yes. Will you help us figure out the insurance paperwork? Yes. Will you help us move? Yes. Will you, always yes, always finding a way to make their problems smaller and their lives easier. What kind of help are you looking for? I don't know. Maybe you could call the property management company? Sometimes older people have more credibility with these business types. Or maybe you could help us find a new place if we have to move. You're good at researching things online, and we're going to be so busy with wedding stuff that we won't have time to. Apartment hunt. Jessica, I work 2 jobs. When exactly would I have time to apartment hunt for you? There was a pause, and I could almost hear her recalibrating, remembering that I wasn't just a resource that existed for her convenience but an actual person with my own life and limitations. Right. Of course. I just thought maybe on your days off or something. But you're right, that's not fair to ask. What will you do if you have to move? I don't know. Brad's parents might let us stay with them temporarily, but their place is small, and his mom has very specific ideas about housekeeping, and it would be really stressful right before the wedding. Or we could stay with you, I guess, if we had to stay with me. In my small rental house with the wobbly furniture and the coffee-stained counters. In the place she'd been ashamed to bring Brad to meet me, the place that wasn't good enough for her regular life but might be acceptable as emergency housing. That would be crowded, I said. I know, but it would just be temporary. Just until we could find something else. And we'd pay you rent, obviously. How much rent? I don't know, whatever's fair. A few $100s maybe? A few $100s. For 2 people to live in my house, use my utilities, eat my food, take up my space. A few $100s, when they'd been paying over $2,000 a month for the house I actually owned. We'll see, I said. Maybe it won't come to that. I hope not. I really can't deal with this stress right now. Planning a wedding is hard. Enough without having to worry about housing. I'm sure it is. Anyway, I should go. Brad's coming home early so we can figure out our next steps. I'll call you later and let you know what we decide to do. Okay. Good luck. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about Jessica's voice when she talked about staying with me. The way she said it like it was settling, like it was a sacrifice she might have to make. The way she offered to pay me a few $100s for the privilege of disrupting my life while she figured out how to get back to her preferred level of luxury. She still didn't understand. She thought this was a bureaucratic mistake, a problem that could be solved with the right phone calls and maybe some legal fees. She had no idea that this was intentional, that someone had looked at her life and decided she didn't deserve the things she'd taken for granted. She had no idea that someone was me. The next few days were a study in controlled chaos. Jessica called me twice a day with updates, each conversation more frantic than the last. Brad's father had hired a lawyer, but the lawyer said the eviction notice was legally sound and their only option was to comply and move out. The property management company wouldn't budge on the violations, and the owner of the house wouldn't take their calls. It's like dealing with a ghost, Jessica said during one of our conversations. No one knows who actually owns the house. The property management company says they just handle day-to-day stuff for the owner, but they won't give us any contact information. The lawyer says that's legal but frustrating. That is frustrating, I agreed, and I wasn't lying. It was frustrating for her, which was exactly the point. Meanwhile, I was having my own conversations with Patricia and Karen, coordinating the timeline and making sure everything proceeded according to plan. The inspection had been completed and documented. The violations were clear and undeniable. Jessica and Brad had 30 days from the date of the notice to vacate the property, which put their move-out date at October 10th. 5 days before the wedding. I hadn't planned that timing specifically, but when I realized how it lined up, I had to admit there was a certain poetic justice to it. They'd spend the week before their perfect wedding dealing with moving trucks and security deposits and the stress of finding emergency housing. They'd go into their special day exhausted and financially strained and probably fighting with each other about whose fault it all was. And I would sit in the audience, in my cheap dress with my gray hair, watching it all unfold. The first major crack in their perfect facade happened on a Friday. Jessica called me from her car, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mom, we can't find anywhere to live. We've looked at 15 apartments this week, and they're all either too expensive or too small or in bad neighborhoods. And the ones that are decent want first month, last month, security deposit, and application fees. We're talking $6,000 or $7,000 just to move in somewhere. That does sound expensive. And that's on top of the moving expenses. And the wedding costs and everything else. Brad's parents are already helping with the wedding, and we can't ask them for more money. They're not rich, Mom. They're comfortable, but they're not write a check for $10,000 rich." I could hear the panic in her voice, the dawning realization that the life she'd been living was more fragile than she'd understood. She'd been coasting on a combination of family help and my secret support, and now that one of those pillars was gone, the whole structure was wobbling. "What about a smaller wedding?" I suggested. "If money is tight, maybe you could scale back some of the expenses and use that money for housing instead." "Mom, no. Absolutely not. This is my wedding day. This is the most important day of my life. I'm not going to compromise on my wedding because of some ridiculous housing situation." "It's not ridiculous if you can't afford both." "I can afford both. We can afford both. We just need to figure out the timing." But she couldn't afford both, and we both knew it. She could afford the wedding with help from Brad's parents, or she could afford emergency housing with help from her own family. But she couldn't afford to have everything exactly the way she wanted it without making sacrifices. And Jessica had never been good at making sacrifices. "What did Brad say when you suggested postponing the wedding?" "I didn't suggest that." "Why would I suggest that?" "Because if you're facing a housing crisis, it might make sense to postpone a major expense until you're more financially stable. The wedding is not negotiable, Mom. We've already sent the invitations, booked the vendors, ordered the flowers. People are flying in from out of state. I'm not canceling my wedding because of an apartment." "I didn't say cancel, I said postpone." "Same thing. Look, I just need to focus on finding a place to live. Can we stay with you for a few weeks while we look for something permanent?" There it was again. The assumption that I would rearrange my life to accommodate her crisis, that my space and my comfort and my routine were less important than her convenience. "Jessica, my house is small. You and Brad would be sleeping on an air mattress in my living room." "That's fine. We're desperate." "For how long?" "I don't know. A month maybe? 2 months? Just until we find the right place." 2 months. 8 weeks of having my daughter and her fiancé living in my small rental house, using my shower, eating my food, taking up my space. 8 weeks of listening to them complain about how cramped and inadequate my home was, how different it was from the house they'd been forced to leave. 8 weeks of being treated like a landlord by my own daughter. "I'll think about it." "What's to think about? I'm your daughter. This is an emergency. And I'm your mother, not a homeless shelter. I need to consider how this would affect my life." "Your life?" Her voice got sharp, the way it always did when she realized I wasn't immediately saying yes to whatever she wanted. "Mom, this is not about your life. This is about helping your family in a crisis. A crisis you created by violating your lease agreement." "We didn't violate anything intentionally. We made minor improvements to a house we've been taking care of for months. We're good tenants, and this is completely unfair." "Fair or unfair, it's happening. And you need to make decisions based on reality, not on what you think should be happening." "I can't believe you're being like this. I thought you'd want to help me." "I do want to help you. But help doesn't mean I have to say yes to everything you ask for without considering the impact on my own life." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, could practically hear her thoughts rearranging themselves around this new version of me, the version that didn't automatically prioritize her needs over my own. "Fine," she said finally. "Fine. We'll figure something else out." I didn't say no, Jessica. I said I'd think about it. "No, it's fine. I get it. You have your own life, and we're adults, and we should handle our own problems." "I understand." But she didn't understand, not really. She understood that I wasn't giving her what she wanted, but she didn't understand why. She couldn't see that this was the natural consequence of telling me I was too embarrassing to be part of her important moments, that I couldn't be both insignificant enough to exclude and important enough to rescue her when things went wrong. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, and hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and looked around my small living room, trying to imagine Jessica and Brad's belongings scattered around it, their clothes draped over my furniture, their food filling up my refrigerator. Trying to imagine coming home from my double shifts to find them sprawled on my couch, complaining about apartment hunting or wedding stress or the unfairness of their situation. The thought made me tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove out to the state park about an hour from town and hiked the trail that led to the overlook. It was something Henry and I used to do when we were first married, back when we had time for things like hiking and picnics and long conversations about nothing important. The trail was harder than I remembered, but I made it to the top and sat on the bench someone had installed years ago, looking out over the valley below. From up there, the town looked small and manageable, like a model train set where you could move the pieces around until everything fit the way you wanted it to. I thought about Jessica's crisis, about the choice she was facing between her perfect wedding and her housing situation. I thought about the way she'd sounded when she realized I might not solve this problem for her, the shock in her voice when I'd suggested that my life mattered too. For 30 years, I'd been solving her problems. Not just the big ones, but the small daily inconveniences that made her life less comfortable than she wanted it to be. I'd picked up her forgotten textbooks from school, covered her bounce checks, helped her move between apartments, co-signed loans she couldn't qualify for on her own. I'd been her safety net, her backup plan, her reliable source of emergency assistance. And in return, she'd grown up believing that having problems solved was the natural order of things. She'd never learned to sit with discomfort, to make hard choices, to accept that she couldn't have everything she wanted exactly when she wanted it. She'd never learned because I'd never made her learn. But now she was learning. Right now, as I sat on a bench overlooking the valley, Jessica was probably in some cramped apartment complex, looking at units that weren't good enough, calculating deposits she couldn't afford, realizing that the life she'd been living was more expensive than she'd ever understood. Now she was learning what it felt like to want something you couldn't have, to need help that might not come, to face the possibility that your perfect day might not be perfect after all. I stayed on the bench until the sun started to set, then hiked back down to my car and drove home. I had work in the morning, both jobs, and I needed to get some sleep. But for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not happy, exactly, but peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since this whole situation started. Jessica was learning something important, even if she didn't realize it yet. She was learning that other people's lives had value too, that support wasn't automatic, that relationships required consideration and respect to survive. And I was learning something too. I was learning that I didn't have to be endlessly available, endlessly accommodating, endlessly willing to shrink myself to make room for other people's needs. I was learning that setting boundaries didn't make me selfish, it made me human. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Jessica and a text message that said, "Call me back ASAP, emergency." I made coffee first, ate breakfast, read the news on my phone. Then I called her back. "Mom, thank God. We found a place." That's great news. It's not great, but it's something. It's a 1-bedroom apartment in Riverside Heights, and it's tiny, and the neighborhood isn't wonderful, but it's available immediately and we can afford the deposit. Riverside Heights. I knew the area. It wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't Willowbrook Estates either. It was the kind of neighborhood where young couples lived when they were starting out, where people made do with less space and fewer amenities because that's what their budgets allowed. It was the kind of neighborhood Jessica and Brad should have been living in all along. "When do you move in?" "Friday." Which gives us exactly 1 week to pack everything and move and get settled before the wedding. It's going to be insane. That does sound stressful. And expensive. The deposit and first month's rent are eating up most of our savings. We're going to be living on credit cards for a while. I could hear the strain in her voice, the way it got thin when she was trying not to cry. Part of me wanted to offer to help, to write a check that would ease her stress and make her life more comfortable. It would be so easy to do, so automatic. But I didn't offer. Because helping her now would teach her that crises were temporary. Inconveniences that someone else would always fix, not consequences that required her to change her behavior or her expectations. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said instead. "Yeah, we'll have to." "How's Brad handling it?" "He's pretty stressed. His parents are disappointed about the neighborhood, and he's embarrassed that we had to downgrade so much. But he's trying to be supportive." "And the wedding plans?" "Everything's still on track. The final payment to the country club is due Thursday, and Brad's parents are handling that. The flowers are ordered, the photographer is confirmed, everything's ready." "Good. I'm sure it will be beautiful." "I hope so. I just want everything to go smoothly. We've had enough drama for 1 month." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about timing. Jessica and Brad would move out of my house on Friday, October 10th. They'd spend the weekend unpacking and settling into their new apartment. The wedding was Saturday, October 15th. 5 days between losing their perfect house and their perfect wedding day. 5 days to adjust to their new reality, to accept that their life looked different than they'd planned. It wasn't enough time. 5 days wasn't enough time to process that kind of change, to mourn the life they'd lost, to find peace with the life they had. They'd go into their wedding day still raw from the move, still adjusting to their smaller space, still wondering how everything had gone wrong so quickly. And I would be there to watch it happen. Not walking down the aisle, not part of the ceremony, but there in the audience with the other older guests, watching my daughter marry her perfect man in her perfect dress at her perfect venue while everything else in her life fell apart around her. The symmetry of it was almost too perfect to believe. The phone rang at 6:15 on Thursday morning, jolting me awake from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. I fumbled for it in the dark, already knowing it would be Jessica because normal people don't call at 6:15 unless someone is dead or dying. "Mom, we have a problem." Her voice was thick with tears and exhaustion. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What happened? The country club called. They said there was an issue with the final payment. Brad's dad's check bounced. I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The final payment that was supposed to guarantee their perfect wedding had failed. The safety net they'd been counting on had just disappeared. Did his father know the check was going to bounce? No, of course not. There was some kind of issue with his business account. Something about a large payment that was supposed to clear but didn't, and now his account is frozen while the bank investigates. He's mortified. He said he's never had a check bounce in his life. What did the country club say? They said, "We have until 5 o'clock today to make the payment in cash or certified funds, or the wedding is cancelled and we forfeit everything we've already paid." Everything, Mom. The deposit, the flowers, the photographer, all of it. I looked at my alarm clock. 6:17 in the morning. Jessica and Brad had less than 11 hours to come up with $35,000 in certified funds. How much do you and Brad have in savings? After the apartment deposit and moving expenses? Maybe 3,000. Maybe 4 if we drain everything completely. And Brad's parents? His dad is trying to get an emergency loan from his bank, but they said it could take days to process, and we don't have days. We have hours. I got out of bed and walked to my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear. Outside, the sky was just starting to lighten, and I could hear the early morning sounds of my neighborhood waking up. Dogs barking, garage doors opening, the distant hum of traffic from people heading to work. What are you going to do? I don't know. Brad is calling everyone he can think of, trying to borrow money from friends and relatives. But who has $30,000 they can lend on a few hours' notice? His college roommate might be able to help with a few thousand, and his cousin said she could do maybe 5, but that's not even close to what we need. Could you postpone the wedding? Mom, no. I told you, that's not an option. We sent invitations 2 months ago. People have made travel plans, booked hotels, taken time off work. Brad's grandmother is flying in from Florida today. She's 83 years old, and this might be the last wedding she ever attends. I can't call her at 6 in the morning and tell her not to come. But if you can't pay for it, then we'll figure something else out. There has to be another option. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my kitchen table. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen in her garden again, this time watering her roses in the early morning quiet. She moved slowly and deliberately, giving each plant exactly what it needed, no more and no less. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. If someone offered to lend you the money for the wedding, what would you be willing to give up to pay them back? What do you mean? I mean, $35,000 is a lot of money. If someone lent it to you today, you'd have to pay it back eventually, probably with interest. What would you be willing to sacrifice to make those payments? I don't know. Whatever it took. We'd cut back on expenses, maybe get second jobs, move to a cheaper apartment. You just moved to a cheaper apartment. Then we'd move to an even cheaper one. Mom, I can't think about paying it back right now. I just need to find the money so the wedding can happen. And after the wedding? What happens when you have to start making loan payments on top of rent and car payments and credit card bills? We'll figure it out. People do it all the time. Lots of couples start their marriages with debt. Some couples. The ones who decide that having a perfect wedding day is more important than having a stable financial foundation for their marriage. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing change, could hear the moment when my question shifted from practical to personal. Are you saying I shouldn't want a nice wedding? I'm saying that wanting something and being able to afford it are two different things. So you think I should just accept that I can't have what I want because I don't have rich parents? I think you should accept that life requires choices, and sometimes you can't have everything you want exactly when you want it. That's easy for you to say. You never had to choose between having a wedding and having nothing. Actually, I did. Your father and I got married at the courthouse because we couldn't afford a big wedding. We spent our honeymoon in a motel. 20 minutes from home because that's what we could afford. We bought our wedding rings at a pawn shop. That's different. How is it different? Because you were young and just starting out. I'm 30 years old. I've been working and saving and planning. I deserve to have a nice wedding. Deserve. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had been burning for years without me noticing it. Jessica believed she deserved things that other people couldn't afford, deserved a life that looked a certain way regardless of what it cost or who paid for it. Jessica, you've been living in a house you couldn't afford, planning a wedding you couldn't afford, and assuming that someone else would always be there to make up the difference when reality didn't match your expectations. That's not true. Isn't it? When you couldn't afford the apartment deposit, who did you call? When you needed help with moving expenses, who were you planning to ask? When the wedding payment fell through, who was the first person you called? You're my mother. I'm supposed to be able to call you when I need help. And I'm supposed to say yes every time, regardless of the impact on my own life. I never said that. You didn't have to say it. You've been assuming it for 30 years. I could hear her crying now, soft and frustrated, the kind of crying that happens when you realize an argument isn't going the way you expected it to. I can't believe you're doing this to me right now. Today of all days. I'm about to lose my wedding, and instead of helping me, you're lecturing me about money and choices and responsibility. I'm not doing anything to you, Jessica. Your wedding might not happen because you and Brad and his parents made financial decisions without considering all the possible consequences. That's not my fault. So you're not going to help me. I didn't say that. But you're not going to just write me a check and fix this. No, I'm not going to just write you a check. Then what good is this conversation? What's the point of calling my mother if she's not going to help me when I really need it? I stood up and walked back to the window, watching Mrs. Chen move between her plants. She'd been gardening in that yard for 15 years, ever since she and her husband moved in next door. Every spring, she planted new flowers. Every fall, she pulled up the ones that didn't make it through the summer. She never complained about the weather or the soil or the plants that failed. She just adapted, adjusted, and kept gardening. The point, I said, is that you called because you wanted me to make your problem go away. But I'm not going to do that anymore. What do you mean, anymore? I mean I'm done rescuing you from the consequences of your decisions. I'm done pretending that my job as your mother is to make sure you never have to face disappointment or discomfort or the reality that you can always have what you want. I'm not asking you to rescue me. I'm asking you to help me. You're asking me to give you $35,000 so you can have the wedding you want instead of the wedding you can afford. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with wanting my wedding day to be special? Nothing, as long as you're paying for it yourself. I am paying for it myself. Brad's parents were helping, but that doesn't mean I'm not paying for it. Jessica, you haven't paid for any of it. Brad's parents paid for the venue. You've been living in a house someone else owns, saving money you would have spent on rent so you could afford wedding expenses. Even your dress came from money you saved by not paying your real housing costs. What are you talking about? Of course I pay rent. I pay it every month. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been building toward for weeks, the moment when everything would finally make sense to her. Who do you make the rent check out to? Riverside Property Management. And who do they send the money to? The owner of the house, I guess. I don't know. That's not my business. It's not your business to know who owns the house you live in? Lived in. We don't live there anymore, remember? We got evicted by some mystery landlord who doesn't even have the courtesy to talk to us directly. Jessica, I need you to sit down. I'm already sitting down. Good. Because I'm about to tell you something that's going to change how you understand the last 8 months of your life. What are you talking about? I looked out at Mrs. Chen's garden one more time, at the careful rows of plants she tended through seasons of growth and dormancy and growth again. Then I turned away from the window and said the words I'd been preparing for weeks. I'm the mystery landlord. I own the house in Willowbrook Estates. I bought it 18 months ago, and I've been paying the mortgage every month while you thought you were paying rent. Silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Jessica? Are you there? That's not possible. It's completely possible. I have the mortgage documents, the insurance papers, the property tax bills. I have records of every payment I've made, every repair I've authorized, every time you called the property management company to report a problem. You're lying. I'm not lying. I bought the house because you wanted to live somewhere nice, somewhere that would impress Brad's family. You couldn't afford it, so I found a way to make it happen without you knowing. Why would you do that? Because I'm your mother, and I wanted you to be happy. But you evicted us. Yes, I did. Why? Why would you buy me a house and then take it away? I sat back down at my kitchen table and looked at the phone in my hand, at this device that was carrying my daughter's confusion and pain across the distance between us. Because you told me I was too embarrassing to walk you down the aisle at your wedding. Another silence, shorter this time but heavier. That has nothing to do with the house. It has everything to do with the house. For 8 months, I worked extra shifts to pay your mortgage so you could live the kind of life that made you feel like you were better than me. I sacrificed my comfort, my savings, my future security so you could impress people who matter more to you than I do. That's not true. Isn't it? You told me I would ruin your perfect wedding just by being there. You said perfect doesn't look like us. You were ashamed to have me stand beside you on the most important day of your life, but you were perfectly happy to live in a house I was secretly paying for. I didn't know you were paying for it. Because you didn't ask. You didn't wonder how you qualified for such a nice place on your salary. You didn't question why the rent was so much lower than market value. You just accepted it because it gave you what you wanted. So you decided to punish me. I decided to stop enabling you by making me homeless right before my wedding. By stopping the subsidy you didn't know you were getting. You're not homeless, Jessica. You found an apartment you can actually afford. You're living within your means for the first time in almost a year. In Riverside Heights. In a neighborhood that matches your income. In a place you can pay for without someone else sacrificing their financial security. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, the way it got when she was trying not to hyperventilate. How much? She asked finally. How much what? How much did you spend on the house? How much money did you waste on me? $32,000. Give or take. $32,000. She said it like she was learning a foreign language. You spent $32,000 on a house for me, and then you took it away because I hurt your feelings about the wedding. I took it away because I realized that giving you things you can't afford doesn't help you. It just teaches you to expect a life you haven't earned. I have earned it. I work hard. I went to college. I have a career. You have a job that pays $30,000 a year. Brad has a job that pays $45,000 a year. Together, you make $75,000, which is a good living but not a Willowbrook Estates living. So I should just accept that I'll never have nice things. You should accept that nice things cost money, and if you want them, you need to earn enough to pay for them yourself. Like you did? The question was sharp, designed to hurt. Jessica had always been good at finding the weak spots in an argument and pressing on them until they broke open. I never lived beyond my means. You lived in a rental house with secondhand furniture. Because that's what I could afford while supporting 3 children on my own. And you expect me to live like that too. I expect you to live like someone who makes $75,000 a year, not like someone who makes $150,000. What if I don't want to live like that? What if I want something better? Then find a way to earn it yourself, or marry someone who can afford to give it to you. I am marrying someone who can afford to give it to me. Brad's going to get promoted, and in a few years we'll be making 6 figures, and then we can afford whatever we want. In a few years. What about right now? What about today? Today I need $35,000, and you're the only person I know who might have access to that much money. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised me. Jessica, I work at a diner and a warehouse. Where exactly do you think I'd get $35,000? The house. You said you own the house. You could take out a loan against it or sell it or something. You want me to mortgage my only asset so you can have a wedding you can't afford. It's not just a wedding, it's my future. It's my chance to start my marriage the right way, with the right people, in the right setting. If we have to cancel, everyone will know we couldn't afford it. Brad's family will think less of me. My friends will think less of me. And that matters more to you than my financial security. It's not about choosing between those things. It's about finding a way to make this work. No, Jessica. It's about accepting that this isn't going to work. At least not the way you planned it. So that's it? You're just going to let my wedding be ruined because you're angry about something I said weeks ago? I'm not ruining your wedding. Your wedding is in jeopardy because you and Brad planned something you couldn't afford and assumed that other people would always be available to cover the shortfall. Other people like you. Other people like me. And now you're saying, no. Now I'm saying that my job as your mother isn't to fund your fantasies. It's to love you enough to let you face the consequences of your choices. She was quiet for a long time, and I could hear sounds in the background that told me she was moving around, probably pacing the way she always did when she was upset. What am I supposed to do? She asked finally, and her voice was small. And lost in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. I don't know. That's for you and Brad to figure out. But I don't know how to figure it out. I don't know how to cancel a wedding or postpone it or plan a different kind of wedding in one day. I don't know how to tell Brad's grandmother that she flew across the country for nothing. Then maybe you call the country club and explain the situation. Maybe you ask if they can work with you on a payment plan or a smaller event. Maybe you have the ceremony and skip the reception. Maybe you get married at the courthouse like your father and I did. At the courthouse. It's not the end of the world, Jessica. It's just not the beginning you planned. But it's not what I wanted. I know. But sometimes what we want and what we can have are different things, and growing up means learning to be okay with that difference. I'm 30 years old. I'm already grown up. Are you? Because grown-ups don't call their mothers crying when their plans fall apart. They adapt and adjust and figure out solutions that don't require other people to sacrifice for them. I can't believe you're being like this. I can't believe my own mother is refusing to help me on the worst day of my life. This isn't the worst day of your life, Jessica. It's just the first day you've had to face the fact that you can't always have what you want exactly when you want it. So what happens now? Now you and Brad decide what kind of wedding you can actually afford, and you make it happen. Or you postpone until you can save up for what you really want. Or you elope and have a party later. There are options, they're just not the option you planned on. And our relationship? What happens to us? I looked around my kitchen, at the space that had always been mine, that I'd never had to share with someone who thought it wasn't good enough. I thought about the 40 years I'd spent putting other people's needs before my own, assuming that being a good mother meant saying yes to everything, meant making myself smaller so my children could feel bigger. That depends on you, I said. It depends on whether you can learn to see me as a person instead of just a resource. It depends on whether you can understand that relationships require mutual respect, not just unconditional support. I do respect you. Do you? Because yesterday you were planning to seat me with the other older guests instead of at the family table. Because 3 weeks ago you told me I was too embarrassing to walk you down the aisle. Because right now, you're angry that I won't mortgage my house to pay for your wedding. I was just trying to make the wedding run smoothly. By excluding your own mother from the important parts. I wasn't excluding you. I was just trying to manage all the different personalities and expectations. Whose expectations, Jessica? Mine, or Brad's family's? She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I need to go, she said finally. I need to call Brad. And figure out what we're going to do. Okay. This isn't over. I know. I'm going to remember this conversation for the rest of my life. I hope you do. I hope you remember that there are consequences for treating people like they don't matter, even when those people love you. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat in my kitchen listening to the dial tone until it automatically disconnected. Outside, the sun was fully up now, and I could hear the normal sounds of my neighborhood starting another day. Cars backing out of driveways, children waiting for school buses, the distant sound of lawn mowers and leaf blowers. I had to get ready for work soon, both jobs, and I needed coffee and breakfast and a shower. But I sat at my table for a few more minutes, thinking about the conversation I'd just had, about the $35,000 Jessica needed and the $32,000 I'd already spent on her happiness. $67,000. That's what Jessica's perfect life had cost so far, and she still didn't have everything she wanted. I wondered if she ever would. I wondered if she'd learn to want different things. I wondered if, somewhere in the chaos of this day, she'd realize that the most valuable thing I'd ever given her wasn't money or houses or solutions to her problems, but the chance to discover who she was when nobody was there to catch her if she fell. I got up and started getting ready for work. I had a feeling it was going to be a very long day. The call from Brad came 3 hours later, while I was serving the lunch crowd at Henderson's. I saw his name on my phone and let it go to voicemail, not because I was avoiding him but because I was in the middle of taking an order and Mrs. Patterson gets cranky if you make her wait. I listened to the message during my break, standing outside behind the diner where the delivery trucks parked and the dumpsters lived. Mrs. Simpson, it's Brad. Jessica told me about your conversation this morning, and I think there might be some misunderstandings that we could clear up if we could just talk. I know this is a stressful situation for everyone, and I'm hoping we can find a solution that works for everybody. Could you call me back when you get a chance? Thanks. I deleted the message and went back to work. There were no misunderstandings to clear up, and there was no solution that would work for everybody. There was only the choice between continuing to enable Jessica's unrealistic expectations or letting her face the reality of her situation. I'd made my choice. The second call came an hour later, and this time it was Jessica again. Mom, Brad wants to talk to you. He thinks there might be a compromise we haven't considered. What kind of compromise? Maybe you could loan us part of the money instead of all of it. Maybe we could have a smaller reception, or postpone the honeymoon, or something that would reduce the total cost. Jessica, we've already had this conversation. But Brad has some ideas about how we could pay you back faster, and he thinks if we could just sit down and talk through the numbers. The answer is still no. You won't even listen to his ideas? I don't need to listen to his ideas. This isn't a negotiation. But it could be. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Yes, it does. Because any amount of money I give you teaches you the same lesson, that someone else will always be there to make up the difference when you can't afford your choices. So you'd rather let my wedding be ruined than loan me money I promised to pay back. I'd rather let you learn that actions have consequences and that planning a life you can't afford leads to situations exactly like this one. I can't believe you're this heartless. I'm not heartless, Jessica. I'm done being your safety net. What's the difference? The difference is that a safety net is supposed to catch you when you fall by accident. You didn't fall by accident. You jumped off a cliff and expected me to be there to break your fall. She hung up on me, and I went back to work. I had tables to serve and orders to take and a second job to get to after my shift ended. I had my own life to live, my own responsibilities to handle, my own future to worry about. And for the first time in 30 years, Jessica's crisis wasn't automatically my emergency too. I worked my evening shift at the warehouse without checking my phone once. There's something cleansing about physical labor when your mind is churning with complicated emotions. Loading boxes, scanning inventory, moving pallets from one location to another requires just enough focus to quiet the noise in your head without demanding so much attention that you can't think at all. By the time I got home at 11:30, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I didn't read them. I took a hot shower, made a cup of tea, and sat on my couch with a book I'd been trying to finish for 2 months. The main character was a woman about my age who'd inherited a small farm and was learning to manage it on her own after her husband died. It was peaceful fiction, the kind where problems got solved through hard work and common sense instead of drama and crisis. I read for an hour, then went to bed and slept better than I had in weeks. Friday morning brought rain and more phone calls. I recognized most of the numbers: Jessica, Brad, a number I thought might be Brad's mother, and several I didn't recognize at all. I let them all go to voicemail while I got ready for work, ate breakfast, and prepared for what I suspected would be a very interesting day. The first message was from Jessica, recorded at 11:47 the night before. Mom, I know you're probably asleep, but I had to call. We found a solution. Brad's cousin can lend us $15,000, and his college friend can do another 8, and we found someone who knows someone at a different venue who might be able to do something smaller for less money. We're going to make this work. But I wanted you to know that we're doing it without your help, just like you wanted. I hope you're happy. The second message was from Brad, recorded 20 minutes later. Mrs. Simpson, this is Brad again. I know you're probably getting a lot of calls right now, and I want you to know that I understand your position. Jessica explained about the house and everything that's been happening, and I get why you're upset. But I also want you to know that we're not giving up. We're going to find a way to have our wedding, and we're going to do it without asking you for anything. I just hope that someday you can forgive Jessica for whatever she said that hurt you. Because she loves you and she's really torn up about all this. The third message was from a woman who identified herself as Brad's mother. Hello, this is Catherine Bradford. I believe you're Jessica's mother. I'm calling because there seems to be some family drama affecting my son's wedding, and I think it would be helpful if we could speak directly rather than letting the children handle this situation. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I deleted the messages without listening to the rest and got ready for work. Whatever solutions Jessica and Brad had found, whatever family drama Catherine Bradford wanted to discuss, whatever crisis management was happening in their world, it was happening without me. That was exactly what I'd intended. At work, I told Cindy, the manager at Henderson's, that I might need to leave early if there was a family emergency. She looked at me with the kind of concern that comes from working with someone for 5 years and knowing their patterns. Everything okay, Lori? You've seemed a little distracted this week. My daughter's getting married tomorrow. There have been some complications. Oh honey, wedding drama. I remember when my eldest got married. Everyone loses their minds for about 6 months beforehand. It'll all work out. I'm sure it will. But I wasn't sure how it would work out. I wasn't even sure what working out would look like at this point. All I knew was that I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, and now I had to see where it led. The call I'd been expecting came at 2:15. I was wiping down tables after the lunch rush when my phone rang, and I saw Jessica's name on the screen. This time, I answered. Hi Jessica. Mom. Her voice was different. Calmer than I'd Expected, but with an undertone of something I couldn't identify. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Okay? Yesterday, when you told me about the house, about paying for it all this time. Was that true, or were you just trying to hurt me? I stopped wiping the table and sat down. It was true. All of it? The mortgage payments, the repairs, everything? All of it. For 8 months. For 8 months. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear something in the background that sounded like traffic or maybe construction equipment. Where are you? I asked. Outside the courthouse. Brad and I are getting married in about an hour. At the courthouse. At the courthouse. With a justice of the peace and 2 witnesses we borrowed from the clerk's office. Just like you and Dad did. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Relieved. Angry. Grateful. I don't know. I feel everything all at once. That sounds about right for a wedding day. Is it? I wouldn't know. This is my first time getting married, and it's nothing like I planned. Most important things aren't. Mom, I need to tell you something before I go in there and become someone's wife. What's that? I was wrong. Not about wanting a nice wedding, and not about being hurt that you wouldn't help pay for it, but about the way I treated you. About the things I said about you being embarrassing, about not wanting you to walk me down the aisle. That was cruel, and it was stupid, and I'm sorry. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the booth where I was sitting. Around me, the diner hummed with its usual afternoon rhythm, the sound of coffee brewing and conversations murmuring and the cash register opening and closing. Thank you for saying that. I called Brad's mom last night and told her we were getting married today instead of tomorrow, and I asked her if she wanted to come. She said she couldn't make it on such short notice, but that she'd plan a nice dinner for us next month to celebrate. How did Brad feel about that? He was disappointed for about 10 minutes, and then he said maybe it was better this way. More intimate. More about us and less about everyone else. Smart man. Yeah, he is. Smarter than me, apparently. He's the one who suggested the courthouse. I wanted to keep trying to find money for the country club, but he said maybe this was the universe telling us to start our marriage differently than we'd planned. The universe or your mother? She laughed, a small sound that held more genuine warmth than I'd heard from her in months. Maybe both. Jessica, can I ask you something? Sure. If I offered to come to the courthouse right now and walk you down the aisle, what would you say? There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing change. I would say yes. But I would also say that I don't expect you to. I know I hurt you, and I know I disappointed you, and I understand if you don't want to be part of this. Where exactly are you getting married? The courthouse on 5th Street. Courtroom B. The ceremony is at 3:30. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 2:20. The courthouse was 15 minutes away if I drove fast and caught the lights right. Jessica? Yeah? I'll be there. You will? I will. Not because you asked, and not because I've forgiven everything that's happened, but because you're my daughter and this is your wedding day, and some things matter more than being right. Mom, I have to go. I need to close out my tables. And tell my manager I'm leaving. I'll see you in a few minutes. I hung up and stood there for a moment, looking around the diner where I'd spent so many hours over the past 5 years. Then I walked over to Cindy and told her I had to leave. Family emergency? Family wedding. Even better. Go. We've got it covered here. I drove to the courthouse through Friday afternoon traffic, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about money or betrayal or lessons that needed to be learned. I was thinking about Jessica at 5 years old, spinning in circles in the backyard in a white sundress, telling me she was practicing for her wedding day. I was thinking about the way she used to plan elaborate ceremonies for her dolls, complete with flower petals and tiny plastic rings. I was thinking about how strange and unpredictable life is, how the things we think we want turn out to be different from the things we actually need, and how sometimes the best days are the ones that start with everything going wrong. The courthouse was a gray stone building downtown, the kind of place where people went to pay traffic tickets and file small claims lawsuits and, occasionally, get married when their original plans fell apart. I found parking on the street and walked through the main entrance, following signs to courtroom B. Jessica was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom, and she looked beautiful. Not magazine perfect beautiful, not country club beautiful, but real beautiful. Happy beautiful. Her dress was simple, cream-colored, the kind of thing she could wear again to other occasions. Her hair was pulled back in a style she'd done herself. And she was holding a small bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd come from the grocery store. When she saw me, her face lit up in a way that took me back 30 years, to Christmas mornings and birthday surprises and all the times when Making her happy was the easiest thing in the world. "Mom, you came. I said I would." "I know, but I thought you might change your mind." "I thought I might too." Brad appeared beside her, wearing a suit I'd seen him wear to other occasions, and he looked nervous and excited and very young. He shook my hand and thanked me for coming, and I could see in his eyes that he understood more about the situation than Jessica had given him credit for. "How are you feeling?" I asked Jessica. "Like I'm about to jump off a cliff and I don't know if there's water or rocks at the bottom." "That sounds like love." "Does it?" "I wouldn't know. I've never done this before." A court clerk came out and told us they were ready for us. The courtroom was small and plain, with fluorescent lighting and worn carpet and absolutely no resemblance to the elegant venue Jessica had originally chosen. There were a few other people waiting for their own proceedings, and they smiled politely. When we walked in, the way strangers do when they're witnessing someone else's important moment. The justice of the peace was a woman about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She positioned Jessica and Brad in front of her bench and asked who would be giving the bride away. "I will," I said, and I stepped forward and took Jessica's arm. The ceremony was brief and simple and perfect. There were no flowers except Jessica's small bouquet, no music except the hum of the air conditioning, no photographer except Brad's phone propped up on a nearby chair. The justice of the peace talked about marriage being a partnership and a commitment and a choice that has to be made new every day. When she asked who gives this woman to be married, I said I do and kissed Jessica on the cheek and stepped back. To watch her become someone's wife. They exchanged rings that looked like they'd come from the same pawn shop where her father and I had bought ours 30 years ago. They promised to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. And when the justice of the peace told Brad he could kiss his bride, Jessica looked happier than I'd seen her look in months. After the ceremony, we stood outside the courthouse taking pictures with Brad's phone and Jessica's, and I realized this was the first time in years that being with my daughter didn't feel like work. There was no performance to maintain, no expectations to manage, no careful balance between what I wanted to say and what I thought she wanted to hear. "Where are you going for your honeymoon?" I asked. "The Riverside Inn," Brad said. "It's about an hour from here. We booked it for 2 nights. "That sounds lovely." "It's not the Bahamas," Jessica said, "but the reviews online were good, and they have a hot tub." Hot tubs are underrated. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are we going to be okay? You and me, I mean. Are we going to figure out how to be mother and daughter again?" I looked at her standing there in her simple dress with her grocery store flowers, married to a man who loved her enough to give up the wedding his parents wanted so he could start his life with her the way they could afford to. I looked at her and saw not the entitled young woman who'd called me embarrassing, but the girl who used to help me fold laundry and tell me about her dreams. "I think we're going to figure out how to be mother and daughter for the first time," I said. "What do you mean?" "I mean we've spent 30 years with me being your mother and you being my child. Maybe now we can learn how to be 2 adults who happen to love each other." "That sounds harder." "It is harder. But it's also better." Brad cleared his throat politely. "I hate to interrupt, but we should probably head to the hotel soon. We have dinner reservations at 6. "Of course. Go. Enjoy your honeymoon." "What will you do tonight?" Jessica asked. "I'm going to go home and read my book and maybe order Chinese food. I'm going to do exactly what I want to do without worrying about anyone else's emergency." "That sounds nice." "It really is." Jessica hugged me, and for the first time in months, it felt natural instead of obligatory. "Thank you for coming," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for walking me down the aisle. Thank you for letting me." I watched them drive away. In Brad's car, probably heading to a honeymoon that cost less than the flowers would have cost at their original wedding. Then I got in my own car and drove home through the late afternoon traffic, thinking about how the day had ended so differently from how it had begun. When I got home, there was a message on my landline from Catherine Bradford. "Hello, this is Catherine again. I understand the children got married today at the courthouse, and I wanted you to know that while I'm disappointed we couldn't be there, I think it's wonderful that they found a way to make it work. I also wanted to apologize if there's been any tension between our families. I hope we can meet properly soon and start fresh. Congratulations on your daughter's marriage." I saved the message and made myself a cup of tea. Then I called the Chinese restaurant and ordered enough food for 3 people because I could afford it and because sometimes celebrating alone means making sure there are leftovers. While I waited for the food to be delivered, I sat on my couch and thought about the conversation I'd had with Jessica that morning, about the choice she'd made to get married at the courthouse instead of going into debt for a venue she couldn't afford. It wasn't the choice I'd expected her to make. For weeks, I'd been bracing myself for her to find some other way to fund her perfect wedding, some other family member to guilt into paying for her dreams. I'd been prepared for her to blame. Me for ruining her special day, to cut me out of her life rather than admit that I'd been right about her living beyond her means. Instead, she'd chosen reality over fantasy. She'd chosen a marriage she could afford over a wedding that would have started their life together with crushing debt. She'd chosen to include me in her courthouse ceremony even though I'd refused. To fund her country club extravaganza. Maybe she was finally growing up. Maybe I was finally learning how to be a mother without being a martyr. Maybe we were both figuring out that love doesn't require one person to sacrifice everything for the other person's happiness. The food arrived, and I spread it out on my coffee table and ate while watching a movie I'd been wanting to see for months. It was a good movie, a romantic comedy about two people who found each other after their lives fell apart in spectacular fashion. The kind of story that only works because the characters learn that what they thought they wanted wasn't actually what they needed. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won some kind of battle with Jessica, but because I'd finally learned the difference between helping someone and enabling them, between being loving and being used. Saturday morning, I woke up naturally instead of to an alarm clock. It was the first Saturday in months that I hadn't picked up an extra shift at the warehouse, and I'd forgotten how quiet the house was when I didn't have anywhere to be. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at Mrs. Chen's garden. She was out there already, deadheading her roses and pulling weeds, the same Saturday morning routine she'd maintained for years. Her garden was beautiful not because she'd spent a lot of money on it, but because she'd tended it consistently, season after season, giving it what it needed instead of what it wanted. I thought about calling Jessica to see how her wedding night had gone, then decided against it. She was on her honeymoon, and I was learning to respect boundaries, including the ones that meant not inserting myself into every moment of my adult daughter's life. Instead, I called Patricia, my lawyer, and asked her to draw up papers transferring ownership of the Willowbrook house to Jessica and Brad as a wedding gift. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked. "After everything that's happened?" "I'm sure. But I want it done right. I want them to understand that this is a gift, not an entitlement. I want them to be responsible for all future payments, maintenance, taxes, everything. And I want them to know that if they can't afford it, they need to sell it and find something they can afford. I can draft something that makes all of that clear." "Good. And Patricia? I want to be there when they sign the papers. I want to explain it to them myself." "When did you want to do this?" "Next week, after they get back from their honeymoon. Let them enjoy being married for a few days before they have to think about mortgages and property taxes." "Will do. Anything else?" "Yes. I want to set up a small trust fund for any future grandchildren. Nothing huge, just enough to help with college expenses or emergencies. But I want it structured so that Jessica and Brad can't access it for themselves." Planning for the future? Planning to be a better grandmother than I was a mother. After I hung up with Patricia, I spent the day doing things I'd been putting off for months. I cleaned out closets, organized my kitchen cabinets, repaired the wobbly chair at my dining table. I did laundry and went grocery shopping and cooked myself a real dinner instead of heating up a frozen meal. It was a quiet day, a normal day. The kind of day that doesn't make for good stories but makes for a good life. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life instead of managing someone else's crises. Sunday afternoon, Jessica called. "Hi Mom. We're back from our honeymoon." "How was it?" "It was perfect. The hotel was lovely, and we went hiking and had dinner at this little restaurant that Brad found online, and we just talked and relaxed. And remembered why we fell in love with each other." "That sounds wonderful." "It was. And Mom? I wanted to tell you that I spent a lot of time thinking about our conversation on Thursday, about the house and the money and everything that's happened. And I understand now why you did what you did. I understand that you weren't trying to punish me, you were trying to teach me something important." "What did I teach you?" "That I can't have everything I want just because I want it. That other people's love doesn't mean they have to pay for my choices. That growing up means learning to live within my means instead of expecting other people to expand my means for me." I sat down at my kitchen table and looked out at Mrs. Chen's garden, where the afternoon light was filtering through the trees in golden shafts. "Those are hard lessons." "They are. But I needed to learn them. I've been acting like a spoiled child for years, and I didn't even realize it until you stopped enabling it." "I should have stopped enabling it sooner." "Maybe. But you stopped. When it mattered. You stopped before I made even bigger mistakes." "What happens now?" "Now Brad and I figure out how to build a life we can actually afford. We're going to stay in the Riverside Heights apartment, and I'm going to look for a better job, and we're going to start saving money for the things we want instead of assuming someone else will provide them." "That sounds like a good plan." "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you think you could ever forgive me for the things I said?" About being embarrassing, about not wanting you at my wedding? Because I know those words hurt you. And I know I can't take them back, but I want you to know that I didn't mean them. Not really. You did mean them, Jessica. At the time, you absolutely meant them. And that's okay, because they taught both of us something important. What did they teach us? They taught me that love without respect isn't really love, it's just obligation. And they taught you that respect isn't something you can assume. It's something you have to earn and maintain. I want to earn your respect back. You already have. By choosing the courthouse over going into debt. By apologizing without making excuses. By accepting responsibility for your choices instead of blaming other people for the consequences. Really? Really? I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. But more importantly, I like you again. And I haven't been able to say that in a long time. After we hung up, I made myself another cup of tea and sat on my couch with my book. Outside, the sun was setting, and I could hear the sounds of my neighborhood settling into evening. Dogs barking, children playing in backyards, the distant hum of traffic from people heading home from their own weekend adventures. I thought about Jessica and Brad in their small apartment, probably unpacking their suitcases and figuring out what to do with the wedding gifts they'd received. I thought about the conversation I'd have with them next week, when I signed over the house they'd been evicted from just a week ago. I thought about the choices we'd all made, the lessons we'd all learned, and the strange way that sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the best things in disguise. Then I opened my book and read until it was time for bed, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a life that finally belonged entirely to me. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of the Willowbrook house, watching Jessica arrange fresh flowers in a vase she'd bought at a thrift store. The house looked different now, lived in rather than staged. There were books scattered on the coffee table, shoes by the front door, and photographs on the mantel that showed real moments instead of perfect poses. The contractors said they can start on the bathroom renovation next month, Jessica said, adjusting a daisy that was drooping slightly. But only if we can save up the deposit by then. And can you? If we're careful. Brad got a small raise at work, and I'm picking up extra hours at the boutique. We should be able to swing it. I nodded, watching her hands as she worked with the flowers. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light, a simple band that matched the one Brad wore. They'd used the money they would have spent on expensive rings to pay for their first month's groceries as homeowners. How does it feel, owning a house? I asked. Terrifying, she said without hesitation. Yesterday the dishwasher started making a weird noise, and I realized that I can't just call the property management company anymore. I have to figure out if it's broken or just needs cleaning or if we need to call a repair person. I spent 2 hours watching YouTube videos about dishwasher maintenance. And it turns out it just needed the filter cleaned. Something I could have done in 5 minutes if I'd known what I was doing. But now you know. Now I know. And next time the dishwasher makes noise, I'll check the filter first. She stepped back and looked at her flower arrangement, tilting her head slightly as she considered whether it was centered properly on the kitchen island. It was such a small gesture, but it made me think of all the times I'd watched her as a child, always trying to make things perfect, always believing that if she could just arrange everything correctly, life would be exactly what she wanted it to be. Jessica, can I tell you something? Of course. I'm proud of you. She looked up from the flowers, surprised. For what? For learning to take care of yourself. For figuring out dishwasher filters and budgeting for renovations and buying flowers at thrift stores because they're beautiful, not because they're expensive. I didn't have much choice. You had choices. You could have kept looking for someone else to solve your problems. You could have convinced Brad to take out loans you couldn't afford. You could have spent the last 3 months angry at me for not rescuing you. I was angry at you. For a while. I know. You had every right to be. She dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something, Mom? Always. When you were buying this house, when you were working extra shifts to pay for it, did you ever resent me? Did you ever think about how unfair it was that you were sacrificing for something I didn't even know about? I considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer, not a comfortable one. Sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Usually when I was working a double shift and my feet hurt and I was calculating whether I could afford to get my car inspected that month or if I needed to wait until the next paycheck. But you kept doing it. I kept doing it because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought being a good mother meant making sure you never had to face disappointment or discomfort. And now? Now I think being a good mother means loving you enough to let you face disappointment and discomfort so you can learn to handle them. She was quiet for a moment, running her finger along the edge of the counter where there was a small chip in the granite. It was a flaw the previous owners had tried to hide with careful staging, but now it was just part of the character of the house. I understand why you did what you did, she said finally. The eviction, refusing to pay for the wedding, all of it. I understand that you were trying to teach me something important. Do you agree with what I did? I agree with the lesson. I'm not sure I agree with the method. What would you have done differently? I would have told me about the house sooner. I would have given me a chance to make better choices before taking the choice away from me. I thought about that. You're probably right. But I don't think you would have listened if I'd just explained it to you. I think you needed to experience the consequences before you could understand why they mattered. Maybe, or maybe I would have surprised you. Maybe you would have. But we'll never know, will we? No, we won't. We can only work with the choices we actually made, not the ones we wish we'd made. Brad came through the front door then, carrying grocery bags and calling out a greeting. He looked comfortable in the house now, like he belonged there instead of like he was visiting somewhere impressive. His hair was messed up from the wind, and there was a small stain on his shirt that suggested he'd stopped for coffee on the way home. How did the grocery shopping go? Jessica asked. Good. I stuck to the list and used coupons like a responsible adult. He set the bags on the counter and kissed Jessica's cheek. Hi, Mrs. Simpson. Thanks for coming over. Thank you for having me. Did you tell her about the dinner party idea? He asked Jessica. Not yet. I was working up to it. What dinner party idea? I asked. Jessica exchanged a look with Brad, one of those wordless conversations that married couples have. We were thinking about hosting a small dinner party. Next month, she said. Nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends. Brad's parents, my brothers if they're in town, maybe a couple of our friends from work. That sounds lovely. We wanted to know if you'd come. And if you'd be willing to help with the cooking. I was surprised by the invitation, not because they'd asked me but because of the way they'd asked. Not as a last resort or because they needed me to solve a problem, but because they wanted me there. I'd love to help with the cooking. What were you thinking of making? We don't know yet. We've never hosted a dinner party before. We were hoping you might have some ideas. I have lots of ideas. When is this happening? The last Saturday in January. Brad's parents are coming to visit, and we thought it would be nice to do something more personal than going to a restaurant. Your first dinner party as homeowners. Our first dinner party ever, Brad corrected. We're pretty nervous about it. Don't be nervous. The best dinner parties are the ones where something goes wrong and everyone laughs about it. Is that supposed to be reassuring? Jessica asked. It's supposed to be realistic. The goal isn't perfection, it's connection. See? Brad said to Jessica. I told you your mom would know what to do. She always knows what to do, Jessica said, but her tone was fond rather than resentful. The question is whether she'll share her wisdom or let us figure it out ourselves. Depends on whether you ask for advice or demand solutions. What's the difference? Advice assumes you're capable of making your own decisions. Demands for solutions assume someone else should make your decisions for you. In that case, we're asking for advice. Then I'll be happy to help you plan a menu. We spent the next hour going through recipes and discussing logistics. Jessica took notes on a pad of paper, asking questions about timing and shopping lists and how many side dishes were too many. It was the kind of conversation we used to have when she was younger, before money and expectations and the weight of unspoken resentments had complicated everything between us. When I was getting ready to leave, Jessica walked me to my car. Mom, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about, but I didn't want to bring it up in front of Brad. What's that? I've been thinking about what you said, about learning to be two adults who happen to love each other instead of mother and child. And I realized that I don't actually know very much about you as a person. What do you mean? I know you as my mother. I know you work hard and you worry about money and you make good meatloaf. But I don't know what you like to do for fun, or what your dreams are, or what you think about when you're alone. I leaned against my car, considering her words. She was right. Our relationship had been defined by her needs and my responses to those needs for so long that we'd never developed much of a connection beyond that dynamic. What would you like to know? Everything. But maybe we could start small. Maybe we could have lunch sometime, just the two of us, and you could tell me about something you've always wanted to do but never had the chance to. Like what? I don't know. That's what I want to find out. I thought about the hiking trail I discovered after our big fight, about how peaceful it had been to sit on that bench overlooking the valley. I thought about the books I'd been reading, about the cooking classes I'd seen advertised at the community center, about the garden I'd been thinking about planting in my backyard. I'd like that, I said. Lunch and getting to know each other like real people instead of just family. Good. I'll call you next week and we'll pick a date. Jessica? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you and Brad are going to throw a wonderful dinner party. And I think you're going to be very happy in this house. Even though we're probably going to make mistakes. Especially because you're going to make mistakes. That's how you learn what works and what doesn't. Is that what you did? Learn from mistakes? That's what everyone does, if they're smart. The trick is making new mistakes instead of repeating the old ones. What's the biggest mistake you think you made as a mother? I thought about that question as I got into my car. There were so many possible answers, so many moments when I could have chosen differently, handled things better, seen more clearly what was happening. I think the biggest mistake I made was believing that protecting you from consequences was the same thing as protecting you from harm. What's the difference? Consequences teach you how to make better choices. Harm just damages you without teaching you anything useful. So letting me get evicted was a consequence, not harm. I hope so. I guess we'll find out as time goes on. I think it was a consequence. A hard one, but one I needed. I'm glad you see it that way. I am now. I wasn't at the time. That's fair. I drove home thinking about the conversation we'd just had, about the dinner party they were planning, about the lunch date we'd scheduled for next week. It felt like the beginning of something new, something I hadn't known I wanted until it started happening. When I got home, I found a letter in my mailbox from the community center. It was information about their spring class schedule, including the cooking classes I'd been considering and a gardening workshop that met on Saturday mornings. I sat at my kitchen table and looked through the catalog, circling classes that interested me. For the first time in years, I had time to think about what I wanted to do instead of what other people needed me to do. It was a strange feeling, but not an unpleasant one. My phone rang while I was making dinner. It was my son Michael, calling from Seattle where he lived with his wife and 2 young children. Hey Mom, how's everything going? Good. Really good, actually. How are Sarah and the kids? They're great. Listen, I heard from Jessica about everything that happened with the wedding and the house. She said you two had some kind of big fight and then worked things out? Something like that. She didn't give me all the details, but she said you taught her some important lessons about money and responsibility. She taught herself. I just stopped preventing her from learning. Well, whatever happened, she sounds different. More mature, I guess. More like she's actually thinking about consequences instead of just assuming everything will work out. That's good to hear. It got me thinking, though. About our relationship, I mean. Mine and yours. What about it? I think I've been taking you for granted too. Not in the same way Jessica was, but still. I call you when I need something, but I don't call just to see how you're doing. I assume you'll always be available when we need help with the kids, but I don't think about whether that's convenient for you or fair to ask. Michael, you don't take advantage of me the way, maybe not the same way, but still. I think all 3 of us kids got used to thinking of you as someone who existed to make our lives easier, not as someone with her own life and her own needs. I sat down at my kitchen table, surprised by his honesty. What made you think about this? Jessica told me about the cooking classes you're thinking about taking. And I realized that I didn't even know you were interested in cooking classes. I didn't know you had interests beyond us kids and work. I'm still figuring out what my interests are. That's what I mean. You're 54 years old, and you're just now getting the chance to figure out what you like to do for fun. That's not right. It's not wrong either. I made choices about how to spend my time and energy, and I don't regret them. But maybe it's time to make different choices. Maybe it is. Sarah and I were talking about this, and we want you to know that you don't have to babysit the kids every time we ask. We can figure out other arrangements if you have other things you want to do. I like babysitting your kids. I know you do. But you should do it because you want to, not because you feel like you have to. Michael, can I ask you something? Sure. When you were growing up, did you ever feel like I was too involved in your life? Like I was solving problems you should have been solving yourself? Not really. You were always there when we needed you, but you didn't hover. You let us make mistakes and figure things out. Jessica was different, though. You rescued her more. Why do you think that was? I think because she was the youngest, and because she was more dramatic about her problems. When Tom and I had issues, we just dealt with them. When Jessica had issues, she made sure everyone knew about it until someone fixed it for her. And I was the someone who fixed it. Usually, yeah. But not always. You made her figure out a lot of things on her own too. Not enough things, apparently. Maybe not. But she's figuring it out now. After we hung up, I made myself dinner and thought about Michael's observation that I'd rescued Jessica more than her brothers. He was right, of course. Jessica had been my baby, my only daughter, and somehow I'd fallen into the trap of thinking that protecting her meant solving all her problems for her. But maybe it wasn't too late to change that pattern. Maybe it was possible to be a mother and a grandmother and a separate person with her own interests and her own life all at the same time. The next morning, I called the community center and registered for the gardening workshop. Then I called Jessica and told her I wanted to start a small vegetable garden in my backyard and asked if she wanted to help me plant it. "I don't know anything about gardening," she said. "Neither do I. That's why I'm taking a class." "Could I take the class with you? You want to learn about gardening?" "I want to learn about lots of things. And I want to spend time with you. Doing something that's not about solving problems or managing crises. I'd like that." "Good. I'll register today." "Jessica?" "Yeah? I'm looking forward to our lunch next week." "Me too, Mom. Me too." 2 weeks later, Jessica and I were sitting in a small cafe downtown, sharing a piece of chocolate cake. And talking about books we'd read and places we'd like to travel and the strange experience of learning to be friends with your own family members. "I never thought about you having dreams," Jessica said, cutting another small bite of cake with her fork. "I just thought you had responsibilities." "I thought so too, for a long time." "What changed?" "I realized that having dreams doesn't make you selfish. Acting like other people should fund your dreams without asking makes you selfish." "Is that what I was doing?" "Sometimes. But you're not doing it anymore." "How can you tell?" "Because you're here having lunch with me instead of calling me when you need something fixed." "I like this better." "So do I." Outside the cafe window, it was starting to snow, big lazy flakes that made the street look like something from a Christmas card. Jessica watched the snow for a moment, then looked back at me. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Always." "I'm glad you evicted me." "Are you really?" "I am. Not because it was fun, because it definitely wasn't. But because it forced me to grow up in a way I wouldn't have otherwise. And because it taught me that you're a person, not just my mother." "What's the difference?" "People have boundaries. Mothers, in my mind anyway, were supposed to be endlessly available and endlessly forgiving and endlessly willing to sacrifice themselves for their children. That's a lot of pressure on mothers." "It is. And it's not fair. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out." "Better late than never." "Do you think we'll be okay? In the long run, I mean. Do you think we'll figure out how to have a good relationship as adults?" I looked at my daughter across the table, at this young woman who was learning to pay her own bills and plan dinner parties and ask for advice instead of demanding solutions. I thought about the gardening class we were taking together, about the house she was learning to maintain, about the marriage she was building with someone who loved her enough to choose a courthouse ceremony over crushing debt. "I think we're going to be better than okay," I said. "I think we're going to be great." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it completely. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.